Dear viewers and listeners, today I will tell you about the famous women in a universe where war is eternal. Enjoy watching. The darker the events of the distant future, the brighter stands out the solitary ray of hope in them, promising, if not salvation, then at least an attempt to change existence for the better. In a universe where miracles are not expected to bring any good, the embodiment of the Emperor's will appeared in the form of a radiant angel. The first about whom we begin our narrative is St. Celestine, the most famous defender of the Imperium, who has repeatedly directed her divinity for the benefit of mankind. It is known that in her early years Celestine fought in the ranks of the Adepta Sororitas, where she was subsequently transferred to the Order of the Holy Martyred Maiden as a Sister Repentia. It is no secret that the warriors who found themselves among the penitent deserved such a measure due to a doubt they could not eradicate from their soul, even with fasting or self-mortification. Given the immeasurable religiosity of the Sisters of Battle, it can be assumed that not all repentiers bear their punishment for actual heresy. Penance for trivial or imaginary sins is commonplace for them. In any case, as the Imperial Creed states, no one is perfect, and each has a fault deserving of penance. When joining the ranks of the Sisters Repentia, the women take personal vows, the meaning and significance of which can vary greatly. However, they are all united by one thing. A vow is considered fulfilled only after the warrior's death, so each extra day lived by a Repentia brings her nothing but longing for missed death in the name of the Emperor. To demonstrate their readiness to give their life, the Sisters Repentia fight in open clothing under which it is impossible to hide elements of armor, and also use predominantly melee weapons, a two-handed chain sword ripper. The use of such a cumbersome and heavy blade leaves the penitent no opportunity to take anything else into battle. Those who successfully fulfill their vow posthumously receive respect and honors from the Adepta Sororitas. One of such glorious warriors was once Celestine, among many other Repentias who fell in the vanguard of the imperial forces in battle before the capital of the planet Eurytion. According to records, the woman was particularly deadly, and before her demise destroyed no less than 100 rebels. While washing Celestine's body of dirt and blood to place it with other revered dead, the sisters noticed that life had not left her. The terrible wounds vanished, and her eyes glowed with divine grace. The next day, the warrior who had given her life for the Emperor led the attacking imperial forces and within a few hours cleansed the planet of rebels. After this victory, Celestine was proclaimed a sacred figure, and the subsequent liberation of the entire sector from the enemies of humanity only strengthened her status. The position of the woman was so strong that she was able to convince the Lord Militant to temporarily deviate from the existing plan to advance into the Palatine sector and first liberate the unremarkable planet of Sanctus Lys. Only the warrior knew that the tomb of St. Catherine of the Order of the Fiery Heart was located in this world. Celestine sensed that for her full ascension she needed to visit the abandoned sepulchre. The soldiers accompanying the woman demolished the altar remaining from the old temple, opening access to the tomb. But Celestine declared that no one but her should descend to the sarcophagus of St. Catherine. Inside, the warrior was awaited by a torturous rebirth, accompanied not only by severe trials but also by temptations. Awakening in an unfamiliar place, the woman found herself naked and devoid of memory. She remembered the Emperor and his divine protection, but could not say who she herself was. Examining her body by touch, Celestine was horrified by the huge scar on her neck, indicating that her head had once been severed from her body. Clambering over the unknown landscape, she repeatedly encountered fallen warriors and, with some surprise, recognized herself in some of them. On one body, the woman saw a pierced breastplate, which for some inexplicable reason she decided to remove from the corpse and put on. Barely placed on her body, the armor restored itself and took on a ceremonial appearance. The warrior was astounded not only by the transformation of the breastplate, but also by the fact that it occurred after a prayer to the divine spirit of the Omnicia unknowingly escaped her lips. Another body, whose upper part was crushed by a stone slab, lay on the ground in the lower part of mangled armor. Trying to fit into the armor removed from a stranger's corpse, Celestine cut her legs severely several times against the protruding metal part, but as with the breastplate, as soon as the armor was fully donned, it miraculously transformed and restored itself. Fragment by fragment, the warrior removed all the components of St. Catherine's power armor from numerous corpses, and concluded that since all the dead bodies turned out to be her own, she had perished many times in various aspects. She had no rational explanations for such strange circumstances. However, on one of the pieces of armor, the woman read the word Celestine and accepted it as her name. Journeying through a field covered with dead, the warrior saw a pyramid made of bones, at the top of which shone a blade. Barely glancing at it, Celestine realized that just like the armor, this great sword belonged to her. Taking it in hand, the woman felt a sense of peace. She had found the weapon bequeathed to her by the Emperor, had become a warrior, had become Celestine. Then, she was unexpectedly attacked by demons. Amidst the battle, the woman didn't notice how she ended up in a dense fog, where she couldn't see anything beyond her sword. The ground vanished beneath her feet, as if in a nightmare the solid earth turned into an abyss. Yet Celestine did not fall, but floated enveloped by wonderful warm feelings, a miraculous manifestation of power that made her soul sing. At that moment, a stream of blessed energy enveloped her body and burst from her back in the form of 2 golden wings. There was no fall. The warrior soared upwards, warmed by the Emperor's light. Celestine circled over the scorched surface, enjoying the wind currents, unable to tell how long it lasted, whether hours or perhaps weeks. The sensation of hunger or thirst felt foreign to her, although her new limbs gradually signalled their fatigue. The warrior decided to find a refuge to rest, but the tower she chose for this purpose was already seized by demons. Preparing for battle, Celestine was surprised to discover that the enemies had already found a victim and were pursuing her through the corridors of the tower. The warrior rushed unthinkingly to help and saved the woman, who upon closer inspection turned out to be her exact copy, equally majestic and equally winged. The rescued woman promised to guide the saint through all the tangled trials ahead of her, to become her beacon in the darkness. When asked about the mysterious similarity, she answered that she was Gemini Superior, Celestine's faith in the Emperor. The warrior was surprised not only by the fact that her faith had taken physical form, but also by the fact that she was called a saint for the first time. She imagined that all saints died and only then acquired their status. But on the other hand, she had encountered many of her own remains and died countless times. The absurdity and at the same time the rightness of what was happening made Celestine's head spin, but she found the strength to raise her blade and swear to overcome all in the Emperor's name. Faith urged the warrior to rest and promised to guard her sleep, to awaken her at the proper time. Since St. Celestine had disappeared and reappeared at the most crucial moments countless times over the centuries, it is possible that during her absences she slumbers under the watchful eye of her faith, to aid the righteous whenever necessary. Yet during that first awakening, Celestine had to complete her own trial. Upon awakening, she understood that her fate was to fight tirelessly and be killed for humanity until the Emperor finally claimed her for himself. Sacrificing lives was her duty, inseparably linked with reward. Duty appeared to her in the form of a man, beside whom a monstrous, grotesque executioner held a blade to the throat of a little girl. Duty demanded from Celestine a heroic act to save the child. Submitting to the order, the saint began to ascend a colossal rock, seemingly endless. Overcoming one obstacle after another, she couldn't explain to herself why the salvation of this little girl seemed so important, overshadowing the lives of many others. The long ascent had stretched over a week, depriving the woman of her sense of time. Yet she stubbornly pressed forward, occasionally leaning her weary body against the crystal ledges of the cliffs. When her strength was nearly exhausted, the reflection of Celestine spoke to her from the surface of the crystals. It voiced all her most shameful suspicions about the Emperor, and said that a saint can never hide from her own doubts. Instead of Celestine, unflattering visions of the last millennium appeared on the cliff's surface, where fanatical adherents of the Emperor's cult tormented ordinary citizens, while glassy-eyed madmen marched into battle. The warrior could not ascend with her eyes closed, and had to endure witnessing the nightmare shown by her reflection. Was she really going to die an infinite number of times for such a life for humanity? To this, Celestine replied that among humans there are many worth fighting and dying for it was indeed for their well-being that the Emperor waged his wars. Then, doubt showed her where it all began. She was not a warrior, but a woman in grey-brown clothes with an aquila on her chest, who fearfully hid in the besieged imperial palace. For a moment, a golden light was reflected in her wide-open eyes as the Emperor himself looked at her. But it was then that he bestowed upon her a duty and a reward, to die and resurrect, to fight and save humanity. Overcoming her doubts, Celestine returned, and with faith and duty destroyed the spawn of chaos in the form of an executioner, defending the little girl called Hope. Despite her profound desire, the warrior understood she could not take the child with her, but promised to do everything in her power to see Hope once more. Soaring upward, faith, duty, and Celestine merged into one golden stream and combined with a force materializing the woman shining like a star. She died and was reborn, realized and saw all that had been a mystery until then. Across the galaxy, millions of candles were lit, dispelling the darkness. The winds of eternity lifted Celestine into the sky, and those waiting at the tomb of St. Catherine witnessed the winged emissary of the Master of Mankind for the first time. The Lord Militant declared Celestine a living saint, and soon thereafter a conclave of priests from the Thorian ecclesiarchy proclaimed her the sacred martyr of the Palatine Crusade. The presence of the saint filled believers' hearts with incredible inspiration, while hundreds of thousands of heretics met their death at the punishing hand of her army. Some experienced fear in her mere presence, for to stand beside her was to be under the gaze of the purest person, in the opinion of the God Emperor. The Adeptus Sororitas gained a new miraculous symbol in the living saint, one that the sisters were willing to follow even into the most terrifying depths of the Eye of Terror. Yet the universal joy over the appearance of St. Celestine evaporated, following her demise during the battle against the renegade Forax. The mad warlord triggered the explosion of an ancient atomic bomb planted beneath his fortress, which turned everything living within several hundred kilometers to ash. It was presumed that Celestine perished in the explosion. However, due to its devastating aftermath, no eyewitness survived to verify these reports. On that day, the Tower of Heroes, located on Terra, mournfully tolled to inform the world's inhabitants of the saint's tragic loss, and 1 billion souls, united in shared grief, paused their labor, focusing their gaze on the imperial palace. Only the sororitas rejoiced at the mourning bell, knowing that even if Celestine did indeed fall, she now stood at the Emperor's right hand. Among the faithful, a significant number believed that the saint did not die during the battle with Forax, as there were documented instances of her appearing throughout the subsequent centuries. One such instance was the battle occurring in the year 980 of the 41st millennium between the Order of the Ebon Chalice and Chaos Fighters from the Black Legion on the cardinal world of Helatine. The Battle Sisters and Space Marines stood against the relentless hordes of enemies, but despite all their valor, the defenders of the Imperium were inexorably perishing. Then, in a hopeless battle, Celestine burst in like a vengeful angel. She vanquished a demon lord, depriving the Chaosites of their power. However, after the victory, the living saint vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. Next, Celestine emerged during the assault of the 13th Black Crusade led by Abaddon the Despoiler on Cadia. Enshrouded in righteous flames, the saint soared above the blood-soaked battlefield at Casa Kraf, but she was not alone. 5 orders of the Battle Sisters from the Order of Our Martyred Lady lost in the Warp 14 centuries prior also joined the battle. Celestine's light served as a beacon for those lost in the Empyrean, guiding them to Cadia at the needed moment. With the new forces, The Imperial defenders gained a temporary advantage in the battle. Celestine immediately engaged in combat with the demon Lord Urkenthos, who had previously slain 2 canonesses of the Order of our Martyred Lady. The living saint not only smote the demon, but also resurrected both warriors. They, Genevieve and Eleanor, imbued with the energy of the Gemini Superior and Celestine's faith in the Emperor, would be brought back to life more than once. Casting Urkenthos's body off the walls of Kassar Craft Fortress, Celestine temporarily demoralized Abaddon's forces, granting a brief respite to the Imperial warriors. It was precisely during this pause between the Chaos attacks that Archmagos Dominus Belisarius' call revealed that the true goal of the Despoiler was to destroy Cardia and the Necron pylons, which impeded the warp from penetrating real space and maintained the only relatively safe egress from the Eye of Terror, known as the Cadian Gate. According to Call, upon achieving his goal, Abaddon would unleash endless demonic legions and crush the defences of the Imperium along with Terra itself. Commanders of the loyalist forces on Cardia ordered fortifications around the pylons, while Belisarius' Call, with the aid of Trazin the Infinite, managed to activate them, severing the local area of space from contact with the Immaterium. The Xenos technology functioned as expected. The planet was freed from the influence of chaos and the demons vanished. However, unexpectedly, deprived of warp energy, the living saint turned into an ordinary woman. The powers deserted Celestine during the battle with Abaddon, whom the warrior had already managed to wound by then. Even in her mortal form, she withstood the Despoiler's blow and vowed that one day she would free humanity from the yoke of the dark gods, to which Abaddon replied, "There is no such thing as freedom." Celestine survived thanks to the haste with which the Despoiler had to depart, and the psychic intervention of Katarina Greyfax, though the saint herself regarded this as yet another manifestation of the Emperor's protection. Abaddon found a way to destroy Cardia along with the pylons, and only 3 million survivors managed to be evacuated from the planet. The people were placed on the vast Mechanicus Ark of Belisarius' Call himself. The remaining fighting forces, led by Celestine, Katarina Greyfax, Belisarius' Call, and the Marshal of the Black Templars, Marius Amalric, declared themselves the Celestinian Crusade and headed to the icy moon Clasus. Due to the impossibility of using warp jumps, the Imperial forces travelled at sublight speed and were therefore easily overtaken by Abaddon's fleet. To save the members of the Crusade, it was decided to sacrifice Belisarius' Call's ship, Iron Revenant, which engaged in battle with the Despoiler's vengeful spirit. The barren moon of Clasus became the endpoint of the journey at the behest of the living saint. She explained that she foresaw their salvation, as well as the salvation of the entire Imperium on this frigid planetoid. Celestine was right. From the approaching Chaos Fleet and the harsh Arctic environment, they were rescued by the Inari, who arrived through the webway gates, hidden on Clasus. The Xenos guided the people to the realm of Ultramar on Macraga. Only upon reaching the fortress of Hera, where Rabute Gilliman was entombed in a stasis field, did Belisarius' Call reveal his plans to resurrect the Primarch. Upon hearing his words, the living saint smiled. All this time she had known the purpose for which the Emperor led her to Macragge. With the aid of the servant of Inead Ivrain, the technologies of Archmagos Dominus Belisarius' Call, and the profound faith of St. Celestine, the Primarch was returned to life. He banished the forces of chaos that besieged Ultramar, with the living saint supporting the Primarch, and enduring alongside him all the ordeals on the path to the throne world, including captivity in the Blackstone Fortress, from which she was freed by the Harlequins of the Eldar, as well as the battle against Magnus the Red on the moon. Finally reaching Terra, Gilliman went to speak with his father, while Celestine emerged to meet the worn-out crowd of desperate pilgrims and penitents. The oppressed and destitute inhabitants of the throne world saw in Celestine a beacon of hope, a promised relief from suffering. Subsequently, the living saint would expend considerable effort to convey to the Primarch the importance and utility of the existing cult of emperor worship. After the audience with the ruler of humanity, Guilliman was restored to his position as Lord Commander of the Imperium, and St. Celestine became the one who placed the golden laurel wreath upon his head. In the following years, marked by the Primarch's counter-offensive against the forces of chaos, there were numerous records of the Living Saint's intervention in battles. However, the latest known event involving her was the battle on the hive world, Sadraka, simultaneously attacked by the forces of Alpha Legionnaires and the World Eaters. Celestine came to aid the detachment of Imperial fists sent to fortify the defenders' positions. However, she was defeated by the champion of the blood god, Khan. Like other servants of chaos before him, Khan disdainfully called Celestine a corpse bride, after which he tore off her wings and decapitated her. Despite such a fatal end, it remains evident that the living saint cannot die as long as her faith in the Emperor remains alive. Therefore, there is no doubt about her imminent return. In the dark universe of eternal war, where superhuman soldiers clash with colossal monsters of other races, there are few places where ordinary mortals can exist peacefully. However, sometimes even among those who live in the best possible conditions atop the wealthiest hive cities, there can appear an individual who will trade comfort for war, surpassing in fearlessness and brutality most Imperial officers. The next heroine is Lotara Sarrin, the most renowned mortal captain of the 31st millennium, a woman who turned away from the Emperor and her Primarch but remained loyal to her own ship. She was born on Terra into the family of a rightful ruler of the Spire. Even in early childhood, the girl realized that more than anything in the world she despised weakness. When her older brother fell gravely ill, little Lotara tried not to approach him. Even looking at the screaming and crying child disgusted her. After her brother died, Lotara felt ashamed of her aversion. However, she understood an important truth for herself. Not all problems can be simply resolved by throwing money at them. Despite having the opportunity to choose any fate, the heiress of a wealthy dynasty preferred to dedicate herself to the service of the Imperium. Her sincere aspirations and courageous character soon earned Lotara numerous awards, which she, however, did not wear unless formally necessary. The young woman spent several years as a helmsman on the flagship of the 12th Legion, during which time she managed to learn well the peculiarities of the World Eaters, and even earn their respect. Lotara Sarrin's personal file noted her resilience, patience, and exemplary bravery. Moreover, it contained a record of her being awarded a unique distinction for remarkable valor, demonstrated in bringing the Star Kingdom of Ashul into compliance. The award took the form of a red handprint on the front of her white uniform. The accounts of who precisely left this mark vary. Most sources indicate that the bloody hand belonged to Centurion Khan. However, there are testimonies suggesting that Angron himself took part in the awarding. A separate confirmation of Lotara Sarrin's exceptional abilities could be considered her appointment as the flagship captain of the World Eaters' fleet at the age of only 30. This made her one of the youngest ship officers in the Imperium and attracted many chroniclers to the Conqueror, desiring to be the first to deliver interesting facts to the citizens about Captain Sarrin. However, Lotara herself found such attention unwelcome, as she was more interested in military achievements than in popularity among peaceful citizens. Chroniclers managed to take several pics of the captain's flag, and even wrote a certain number of verses about the delicate woman in the legion of the relentless warriors before Lotara complained to Angron. The next day, the pesky mortals were sent back to Terra, declared unfit for warfare in the void, and suffering from space sickness. The idea to use an invented but almost plausible reason for the chronicler's expulsion belonged to Captain Khan. He, along with several other Space Marines, participated in the farewell process, ensuring that the World Eaters performed their task without bloodshed. With commendable admiration and calmness, the Astartes expelled the mortals from the ship without causing them physical harm, but had plenty of laughs at their protesting screams. The Conqueror, a significantly modified Gloriana-class ship, embodied the spirit of the Legion, unmatched in its barbaric efficiency, and Lotara was happy to utilize its unique advantages in battle. The flagship of the World Eaters featured a special combat weapon known as Bear Claws, a crude boarding tool that allowed the enemy ship to be pulled to their own side. Each claw was a massive harpoon the size of a small frigate, embedding itself in the hulls of enemy ships. Once inside, the claws activated and released powerful magnetic elements that irreversibly gripped the insides of their prey. Following this, the chains linking the Conqueror to the enemy vessel began to move, and the ship Lotara Sarrin, with sinister deliberation, reeled the helpless adversary towards itself. During large-scale battles, bear claws could be used not only as a boarding tool, but also as a means to press enemy ships against its sides, using them as a living shield. Beyond its crude armor and increased number of weapons, the Conqueror was also distinguished from other Imperial ships of its class by enhancements that allowed it to reach higher speeds. This made the flagship of the World Eaters one of the fastest and deadliest ships, leaving enemies with no chance for escape and salvation. The battleship's power under the competent leadership of Captain Sarrin turned the phrase, "No one escapes the Conqueror," into an irrefutable truth. The young woman communicated with Space Marines and subordinates in the unique dialect of the World Eaters, Nagarakali, although she retained the accent characteristic of a native from the higher echelons of the capital world. The rough dialect of the 12th Legion might seem unfitting for the lips of a young woman, yet she mastered it so well that during particularly gripping situations she could use sharp expressions capable of astonishing even a legionnaire. Lotara showed particular care, not only for her ship, but also for the legion she served. The captain personally selected talented assistants, taking exceptional mortal officers from other ships into her command crew. She managed to monitor all processes, not neglecting the fate of the Astartes with whom she interacted. The woman demonstrated considerable cunning to outwit Archmagos Velkerida, and learned from him the prospects of legionnaires whose minds had been crippled by butcher's nails. Her primary concern was for Captain Khan, who was her closest ally. During the years when the Imperium was torn apart by Horus's rebellion, Lotara Sarrin remained faithful to her legion, and did not abandon the fleet she had been commanding for about 6 years. The young woman was devoted to her crew and ship, and she largely shared many of the World Eaters' views. The Space Marines referred to Lotara as our killer, as the Conqueror under her leadership engaged in space slaughter, rivaling the ruthlessness of the 12th Legionaries on the surface. Captain Sarrin managed to control the actions of 300 crew members on the command bridge, analyzed data in her mind without resorting to electronic calculations, maintained communication with Space Marines and the Primarch, while simultaneously leading her own battles. She loved risk no less than any of Angron's sons. However, unlike the legionnaires possessed by the butcher's nails, she did not lose her mind or military cunning. Despite the inherent mortal dread, when communicating with the Primarch World Eater, the woman remained the living embodiment of cold calm. Doubting the rationality of Angron's plans, Lotara was not shy in asking critical questions and distracting the Primarch with remarks even during battle. Such an instance occurred in one of the battles of the Shadow Crusade on the planet Armatura. No one, except Captain Sarrin, suspected the trap set by the Ultramarines for the World Eater. However, her warnings were disregarded, ultimately leading to catastrophic consequences, and nearly resulting in the Primarch's demise. While the Legion fought on the surface, the protection of the Conqueror was entrusted to 5 full companies of the best shipboard fighters, significantly surpassing most World Eaters in void combat and boarding skills. 500 of Angron's finest warriors were led by the Legion Arena's undisputed champion, Centurion Delvarus. He was the one destined to lead the squad of fighters after Captain Sarrin potentially employed the Bear Claws. However, by Lotara's own admission, this legion never did anything as it should. Succumbing to the desire to earn glory in battle on the surface, the arrogant Delvarus made an unauthorized landing, of which he did not inform the captain. Therefore, when the dying ultramarine ship performed a suicidal maneuver and subsequently boarded the Conqueror, the flagship's mortal crew found themselves utterly defenseless against the wrath of the Primarch Guilliman's Space Marines. To save her ship, Lotara decided to awaken Dreadnought Lork, the former Legion's master. The woman had to explain to the Ancient One, who had been asleep for a long time, why he needed to engage in battle with the Ultramarines, and also inform him about the war against the Emperor. The captain could not predict the dreadnought's reaction, and by appealing to him for assistance, she risked bidding farewell to her life. However, it was her only chance to not surrender the Conqueror to the 13th Legion. Lork fulfilled the order, and together with 2 other dreadnoughts, set out to clear the decks of Ultramarines. But even Lotara did not miss the opportunity to join the fight. She had her pistol with her, always loaded and impeccably polished. The woman shot at Guilliman's Space Marines and pushed away the bodyguards attempting to take her to a safe place. When all Ultramarines on board were destroyed, Captain Sarrin thanked Lork and the other ancients for their protection, receiving in return a respectful bow which seemed almost unthinkable for a warrior entombed within a contemptor. Lork respected the captain and fondly recalled the day she was awarded the Blood Hand. However, such reverence was not felt by Centurion Delvarus, who returned aboard the Conqueror after the battle's conclusion. Upon barely noticing as he disembarked from the Stormbird, Lotara, without hesitation, shot the Space Marine in the face. It is hard to imagine a more reckless act, but the quality that drove the captain's banner in such a manner was precisely what united her with the World Eaters. As she watched the crest-adorned helmet of the Adeptus Astartes recoil backward, Lotara felt a surge of satisfaction from her truly excellent shot. Less than a second later, several bolts exploded 6 meters from the woman. She was saved by the psychic shield of one of the Legion's psychers, but instead of being frightened, Captain Sarrin became enraged. The Space Marines dared to shoot at her aboard her own ship. Several more warriors attempted to prevent possible bloodshed, but neither Delvarus nor Lotara intended to back down. The Astartes raised his hammer over the woman, for which he spat at his feet. If not for the more aggressive intervention of other Space Marines, the captain's fiery temper could have doomed her that day. Emerging from behind her defenders, Lotara informed Delvarus in stern terms that his actions had led to the deaths of 2,000 trained crew members, and the Conqueror had sustained damage that would take no less than a month to repair. Not forgetting to include a few insulting remarks in her speech, the captain sent Delvarus under arrest, forbidding him from leaving his own quarters. Lotara's reaction to the Centurion, her fearless delivery of punishment to a Space Marine, raised no questions among the higher leadership of the World Eater, and even made Primarch Angren laugh. To Lotara's disappointment, the traitor legions attacked the Ultramar realm's planets, primarily with the forces of the Adeptus Astartes, saving the woman and her formidable ship for the final act of extermination. All she could do was admire the undoubtedly beautiful demise of a planet, wistfully sighing over her own inaction. In one such moment, Lotara decided to dispel her boredom by playing cards with the dreadnought Lork, but the game did not go well from the start. The first problem was that the Ancient One's overly massive extremities lacked the dexterity needed for a card player. This was resolved by enlisting a servitor to hold the cards on behalf of Lork. But the second problem could not be overcome. After just one game, it became clear that the dreadnought did not know how to lose gracefully, thus intimidating those around with his dangerous fury. Captain Sarrin harboured no hatred for the Imperium, and even felt a bit nostalgic for the times when she still received a salary. Service on Horus's side had deprived the fleet's officers of financial support. She did not find it necessary to hide her opinion regarding the rebellion, and openly told Khan that the war waged by the Legion after Istvan III was madness. Besides, the woman considered their main allies, the Word-Bearers Legion, to be insane fanatics, though she could not deny the magnificence of Lorgar's new ships. Captain Sarrin was not concerned with the reasons behind the conflict that prompted the Primarchs to rebel against the Emperor. Her only interest lay in the execution of victorious battles. In Captain Sarrin's opinion, there existed no fundamental difference between a blood-maddened world-eater, wildly tearing across the surface of a world being annihilated, and Lotara standing frozen on her command throne. Her battles were no less thrilling, and demanded the same feverish concentration as any ground combat, yet they were something more civilized. Ships of colossal size could deliver lethal blows to enemy fleets from unimaginable distances or pass so close to each other that they scraped the paint off their hulls. All of this required focus and cold reasoning. In the war led by Captain Sarrin, one had to think. Before the battle, she felt anticipation, and like a huntress, prepared for all the tricks her prey might devise. But in the thick of combat, Lotara was the embodiment of calm and rationality. She knew the Conqueror's weapon systems inside and out, remembered the names of all the responsible overseers and the exact types of ships she could disable at specific speeds. Her gaze simultaneously encompassed the locational and vector hololiths, targeting displays, and even all the command officers analyzing the efficiency of each. Despite continuously issuing orders and constantly tracking updated data, Captain Sarrin found time to interact with the warriors on the surface, relaying information to Khan and Angron. When the World Eaters were exterminating the population of Nuceria, Lotara had to face a fleet of ultramarines led by Robut Gilliman. She anticipated possible actions of the enemy forces and calculated the optimal strategy. Yet she harbored no hope for a magnificent victory, as the heretic forces were significantly inferior to the Ultramarines. However, as Captain Sarrin believed herself, she earned the bloody hand not by complaining about fair odds. The Conqueror conveyed all gathered information about the Ultramarine ships to the World Eaters on the surface and stood in defense of the orbit to prevent the mass landing of Gilliman's sons on the surface. The captain intended to prevent numerical superiority and protect the World Eaters, even at the cost of preserving the flagship and her own life. The battle inflicted substantial damage on the 12th Legion fleet. The Conqueror was once again boarded by the Ultramarines and lost many valuable crew members, including the navigator. But this time, Centurion Delvarus and his warriors remained on board, repelling the ship from the invasion. The wounded Lotara survived thanks to the protection of the Space Marines and found the strength to retract all the disparaging words she once called Delvarus. The severely damaged Legion accomplished their objectives and returned aboard with the Primarch, who ascended on Nuceria as a demon prince. The presence of the altered Angron turned several decks of the Conqueror into wailing human flesh, reaching out to the crew with numerous mouths. The number of people and Space Marines killed by the Primarch defied calculation, and the refined water supplies were transformed into blood. Witnessing all of this, Lotara promptly suggested to Khan the only solution she deemed correct: to eject Angron from the ship into the void of space. To the flagship captain's dismay, her proposal was rejected. The issues stemming from the presence of the Demon Prince on the Conqueror intensified each day, and shortly thereafter were compounded by the depletion of resources and provisions. The supply chain for the traitor legions differed from what they were accustomed to during their service to the Imperium. Now, their survival depended solely on the amount they could plunder. Upon encountering a suitable planet, Lotara would give the command to replenish the ship's resources, disregarding the consequences this would have on the encountered world. The captain's task was to acquire water, food, fuel, and iron, as well as tens of thousands of fresh slaves. The situation remained unchanged, even if civilizations were loyal to Horus, as restocking the Conqueror's resources promised them the fate of a dead planet. Worlds were turned into ashes, with deserted, burnt cities. Yet Lotara Sarrin and the World Eaters could relish in clean water. During the long transit to Terra, the flagship lost its astrogation capability, and both mortals and Astartes became hostages to the Conqueror, which to many seemed intent on killing everyone on board. Initially, the temperature on the ship rose to critical levels, turning the searing decks into a living hell. This, along with a lice infestation, forced Lotara to strip herself of hair by shaving her head. Then the heat somewhat subsided, but the hunger and lice remained. The mortal crew and the Space Marines began descending into madness, episodes of which most often led to murders. Attacks by the World Eaters on humans became commonplace. Sometimes it was merely to sever a limb from a person, with Astartes finding sustenance this way. although most of the atrocities happened without any cause. Lotara, like everyone else, was experiencing exhaustion and fatigue, but continued to perform her duties as before. She was saved from hunger by stimulants synthesized from Khan's blood. The rules of the Imperium were a thing of the past. The World Eaters faced only the necessity to survive, where an Astartes sacrificing his blood for a mortal no longer seemed unthinkable. The Conqueror suffered from constant breakdowns, which forced Lotara to dispatch repair crews to various parts of the ship. However, the mortal engineers were repeatedly kidnapped and devoured by the spawn of chaos. Consequently, legionnaires capable of destroying horrific creatures were assigned as escorts for their protection. However, Captain Sarrin soon realized that the number of losses had not diminished. The butcher's nails in the heads of the Astartes would activate at the most inopportune moments, and the warriors would kill those they were supposed to protect. Mortals increasingly spoke of feeling as if the ship was attempting to kill them. However, the captain held the opposite opinion. One night, the corpse of an officer long killed by Khan, whom Lotara missed the previous evening, ended up in her bed. The man appeared just as he had before, except he was dead. Captain Sarrin had witnessed with her own eyes how the crew assembled the officer's remains from the deck after Khan had torn him apart. The body was then destroyed, and Lotara herself ignited the fire in the cremation chamber. Yet the Conqueror returned the man. The possessed ship attempted to please its captain. However, the overall bloodlust on board had reached such proportions that a significant portion of the dead crew and space marines conspired to leave the cursed battleship. They did not intend to desert and abandon the Legion. The problem was only the Conqueror. The Astartes tormented the ship and demanded blood, reducing the mortal crew day by day. If their bloodlust could not be satisfied with humans, the legionnaires would turn to cutting each other. Mass executions were staged on board, where mortals were fed to the Angren locked in the hold. A vast majority of the crew lost limbs due to the legionnaires' escapades and were ultimately biomechanically fused to their consoles. This was the only way to keep the terrified individuals at their workstations. Witnessing this nightmare, Lotara had already realized with horror that her beloved Conqueror, which she would once have pitted against any warship of the Imperium without a doubt of victory, had now lost its power. For the first time in her service, the flag captain would not send her ship into battle, as she understood her team was a mass of mutilated and unfortunate mortals. Among those ready to leave the Conqueror for their own survival were respected warriors, whom no one could suspect of cowardice or pusillanimity, including Skena, a space marine who had once defended Lotara during her confrontation with Delvarus. By that time, most of the living aboard had a horrific appearance, suffering from illnesses, hunger, and warp-borne nightmares. Even space marines had lost their usual invincible image. Skana began to stutter and could no longer control his Betcher's gland, which constantly scalded his face with acid. The space marine killed Lotara's bodyguard and proposed she join the conspiracy. He did not do this out of warm feelings for the captain, but because without her knowledge the escape was most likely doomed to failure. The rebels on board held a meeting where Lotara presented a plan in which 50 World Eaters, 300 crew members and a number of essential slaves were to evacuate to another ship using transport shuttles filled with the last reserves of resources. The woman spoke before those gathered for nearly an entire hour, detailing every aspect and patiently answering every question. The sole irremediable flaw in their plan remained Khan, who was decidedly unwilling to abandon the Primarch and would kill any who attempted to leave the doomed ship. The conspirators spoke of Khan as something far scarier than a mere bloodthirsty warrior, as if he were not a space marine but an implacable and lethal force of nature. The flag captain had to promise that she would handle this issue personally. On the day of their escape, Lotara headed to the hangar, dressed anonymously in a mechanic's coverall. She made no attempt to conceal her face, confident that the hangar's techs and slave gunmen were unable to recognize her without her usual uniform. The ship's lower castes had never seen their captain alive, Just in case someone did manage to identify her, the woman kept her pistol in the coverall's pocket. As Lotara took a step on the stairs of the last transport shuttle in the hangar, Khan appeared. Seeing him, the Space Marine in Skarna shielded the woman with his body and ordered her to flee, assuming that Angron's loyal son had not recognized Captain Sarrin. At this moment, Lotara briefly dreamed of the peace that an instant death might bring her, but such was not to be. Khan remained the flag captain's closest ally. It was she and no other who informed him of the impending mutiny. Together, they sentenced Skarna to death, and Lotara, without remorse, aimed her pistol at the one willing to sacrifice his life for her. She pulled the trigger, fulfilling the heavy duty of a captain, punishing a mutineer for rebellion. After that, the Conqueror opened fire and destroyed 5 transporters attempting to evacuate the runaways to another ship. No resources were damaged, as Lotara and Khan ensured the shuttles were empty. Everything went according to their plan. Nothing important perished in the explosions, and the flagship rid itself of useless cargo and cowardly rebels. As before, Captain Sarrin gave her enemies no chance to leave the Conqueror. When the World Eater's fleet reached Terran orbit, no one on the flagship's board maintained the compartments anymore. A sharp scent of blood filled the air, crew members were missing from the bridge, and entire sectors of the command deck fell into darkness. Captain Sarrin appeared as battered and filthy as her ship, yet retained remnants of her pride. Realizing the Primarch's conduct would soon lead to the Conqueror's destruction, the woman turned to Khan once more, asking the warrior if he wished death upon Angron. As she anticipated, his answer was negative. Then the captain proposed her plan to expel Angron from the ship. The Space Marine struggled to grasp her words, as he was already under the influence of the Blood God. In her conversation with him, Lotara, like other mortals, could not help but feel terror. However, when the warrior attempted to contradict her, the woman forgot her fear and yelled at the champion Khan, not neglecting to add a sufficient amount of curses and insults to her speech. The Space Marine suggested that such insolent behavior was linked to the influence of chaos on the entire Legion. The ship had turned into a crucible of fury, and even mortals had been infected by the World Eater's thirst for blood. Lotara informed Khan that according to information she received from the Alpha Legion, there was a special prison for Primarchs aboard the Night Lord's ship, Shade. The flag captain planned to send Angron there, isolating him from potential victims until landing on Terra. Blood-drunk Khan found himself unable to muster the strength to ask Lotara when she had made acquaintance with the sons of Alpharius, yet he agreed to participate in her plan. Together they began negotiations with Night Lord Gendor Skravok, who had previously experienced what it meant to be imprisoned in an unfathomable labyrinth. After long disputes and several attempts by both sides to sever communication, an agreement emerged, wherein Skravok would take Angron aboard the Shade, hoping to gain a portion of the glory surrounding Khan. It was decided to place a teleportation beacon on the Primarch as part of the plan. Lotara took on the coordination of the process, monitoring Angron and activating the teleportation mechanism, while Khan's role was to meet with the Primarch. The hunt for the maddened Angron turned into a lengthy wander through dark decks, littered with countless corpses, with Lotara's voice in the Vox transmitter being the only thing calming the Space Marine agitated by bloodlust. Nearly perishing, Khan managed to accomplish his task and affix the teleportation device to Angron, which was immediately activated by the captain, who did not hide her joy at finally ridding her ship of the Demon Prince. Conflicting sources narrating the final fate of Lotara Sarrin cannot provide an accurate description of her death. However, there is reason to believe that the most renowned officer of the 12th Legion did not survive the battle for Terra and perished, never leaving the Conqueror vessel, subsequently becoming part of it. In a universe of darkness and despair, even those who stand for the light of the Emperor and the preservation of humanity can be frightening figures. Those who do not choose their fate but are born already endowed with a gift that none would willingly accept. Our heroine, Amendera Kendel, a warrior who broke all her vows of the Sisters of Silence, yet remained in history as the most famous among them. Kendel was born 30 years before the beginning of the Horus Heresy on an unnamed planet in the Belladone Reach. Even at the selection stage, Amendera showed herself as a brave and talented girl with great potential. It was not long before Kendel completed her novitiate's path, pledging an oath to the Emperor and accepting the oath of silence mandatory for the Sisters of Silence. Witch hunters take their vow of silence with the utmost seriousness. Breaking it is akin to signing their own death warrant at the sword of a battle sister. However, this does not mean the women do not communicate among themselves, for 2 sign languages were specifically developed for the communication of the Sisters of Silence: Thoughtmark and Battlemarch. The latter, crude and simplified, is used in the process of combat, whereas Thoughtmark serves as a means of conveying subtle and intricate concepts. Representing such a refined and complex language with numerous shades of meaning that not all its phrases can be translated into Imperial Gothic. For communication with representatives of other factions, the Sisters of Silence turn to novices who have not yet taken their vows and can serve as interpreters. Another non-verbal means of communication for the hunters can be considered the Astartes battle gestures language, also mandatory for all Sisters of Silence to learn. Early in her path, Amendera became acquainted with Emrilia Herkadze, another native of the Belladone periphery, also possessing the pariah gene. However, their friendship ended after the battle with the Fire Witch on Sheol Trinus, where an emotional Herkadze refused to retreat and rushed at the enemy. Amendera Kendel attempted to persuade her friend on the necessity of regrouping but was not heeded, and after the battle was accused of inaction. Herkadze lost an eye and suffered severe burns, but blamed this not on her own recklessness, but on Kendel. By the final stage of the Great Crusade, Amendera attained the status of Knight of Oblivion, becoming a member of the Silent Sisterhood's elite combatants. Selection for this group of warriors is based on the personal list of merits for each, as well as considering their anti-psyker capabilities, which may vary in strength. A Knight of Oblivion is typically employed only in the largest battles, where there is a threat of powerful psykers emerging during the suppression of sorcerer-provoked uprisings and subsequent purges among the populace. These roles, combined with the sinister aura of pariahs and existing rumors about them, make Knights of Oblivion objects of fear for ordinary citizens of the Imperium. According to witnesses, people near Null Maidens experience constant discomfort and unexplainable anxiety, while psykers, including navigators and astropaths, can barely stand. Their fleet, consisting of the Black Ships, plays a significant role in spreading the grim reputation of the Silent Sisterhood. Any other Imperial vessels always travel with pennants and signal lights indicating the dimensions of the hull, but the Sisters of Silence's ships move in complete darkness. Even the most observant watcher can see nothing but outlines visible against the stars behind. However, it is not only the mortals, but also the Astartes who, when encountering the Sisters of Silence in joint campaigns, note the unpleasant sensations they experience. Nathaniel Garrow, who fought alongside Amendera Kendel against Xenos psykers, claimed to feel a disconcerting sense of absolute transparency when responding to the warrior woman's questions. In that place, Imperial forces faced off against the Yorgul, mechanically enhanced creatures whose offspring possessed incredible psychic abilities that dissipated upon reaching maturity. Their power was so immense that one of the Xenos managed to deprive Garrow of the ability to move and would likely have killed the Space Marine had it not been for the intervention of Amendera Kendel. The warrior woman shot the Yorgul and saved the Death Guard, thereby earning his trust, which played a significant role in ensuing events. Following this, the commander of the Silent Sisterhood dispatched Amendera to search for the lost black ship Validus, where the warrior woman once again encountered her old friend Emrilia Herkadze. During the investigation, it was discovered that the ship, lost in the warp, had been seized by a powerful psyker likely exceeding the strength of 2 knights. But after the enemy pointed to the novice accompanying Kendel and claimed to be her version from the future, Herkadze found a way out of the situation. She simply killed the young girl, cutting off the potential future where she would become a threat. The death of the assistant further soured relations between the 2 women. However, Hakazi was so incensed by Amendera's attempt to listen to the envoy from the future that the warrior woman broke her vow of silence and voiced all her grievances. Despite the resentment and a new escalation of hostility, Kendel did not report that her former friend had broken her oath. After the first battle of the Horus Heresy on Istvan III, Amendera Kendel's ship intercepted the Imperial Fist's flagship Phalanx, aboard which Nathaniel Garrow and 70 other surviving loyalists were intending to reach the solar system. The Sister of Silence volunteered to become the protector of the Death Guard captain and to place him and his comrades in the Somnus Citadel on Luna. Reflecting on this, Garrow concluded that a wiser decision would be hard to imagine, for if he were under the care of any other, such as the Imperial Fists, sooner or later irreconcilable disputes and even bloodshed would have inevitably begun. But in the citadel of the Sisters of Silence, under the guard of women with whom the Death Guard had only recently fought shoulder to shoulder, even the most irritable warriors would not provoke conflict. In the period preceding the Siege of Terror, Malcador the Sigillite decided to create an organization of vigilant men and women whose task would be the search and destruction of mutants, traitors, sorcerers, or Xenos. Amendera Kendel became one of the first founders of the Inquisition, and received from the Sigillite a brand with the personal symbol of the Lord Regent, bestowing the woman with immense power. For this, Amendera had to leave the Sisters of Silence. She believed that her oaths had not been broken but merely altered. This was precisely what Malcador the Sigillite argued, persuading the woman to accept the title of Agentia Tertius. According to the Lord Regent, Kendel continued to uphold her oath to protect the Emperor and humanity, and therefore she violated nothing. However, other Sisters of Silence declared Amendera a traitor and oathbreaker, shielded from execution only by the authority of Malcador the Sigillite. Transitioning to the new organization also allowed the warrior woman to forego her vow of silence, which unexpectedly unveiled significant oratory skills and supernatural insight in Kendel, demonstrated before her first mission in the service of the Lord Regent. Under the Sigillite's orders, Agentia Tertius was to travel to the Proxima Majoris system, where an agent of chaos operated, secretly conveying valuable information to the War Master. Kendel was tasked with conducting an investigation on the capital world to find the traitor. However, since the founder of the Inquisition did not yet possess her own combat units, before the mission could commence, she had to first secure a team of aides. Amendera visited Death Guard prisoners on Luna and persuaded 2 of them to become her escorts. The Space Marines, who felt undeservedly imprisoned, attempted to vent all their frustration on the woman addressing them, but she curtailed this, convincing the Astartes to cease complaining and return to fulfilling the purpose for which they were created. The convoluted case on Proxima Majoris turned out to be more complex than previously assumed. Amendera identified one suspect after another, ended up in dead ends, and restarted her investigation. There was a constant impression that the traitor was about to be uncovered, but at the last moment, the Imperial group would stumble upon the lifeless body of the suspect and return to the beginning. After several similar episodes, Agentia Tertius arrived at the only resolution that would definitively stop the transmission of valuable information to Horus. The representatives of the Imperium returned to their ships, and Amendera Kendel became the first mortal in history to give the order to initiate exterminatus.